The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us today. Apologies with the delay, microphone problems there. Thanks very much for joining us for this observations webinar around the Customer Service Practitioner and Customer Service Specialist Endpoint Assessment. Now, just before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. Just to note that this session will be recorded and it will be sent on to you directly after the webinar, so you will be able to revisit the recording. We will also make sure that you will have a copy of the slides. We will download the slides and we will upload these to our Business Skills Qualifications webpage. If you do have questions throughout the webinar, there is a function within GoToWebinar to add your questions, and at the very end of the webinar we will try and address as many of these as possible. Of course, if we don't get through them all, then we will create a frequently asked questions list, and again we will upload this to the Business Skills Qualifications webpage. And finally, before we do start, if the session does cut out, please use the original webinar link to try and regain access. So just to start off, some information, some introductions, apologies. My name is Don Green, Technical Advisor for Business Skills at City and Guilds.
And good morning, everybody. I'm Rebecca Hollenby, and I'm one of the 3 EPA Partnership Managers working here at City and Guilds.
So a brief look at what we're going to look at in this session. We're going to first of all start with an overview of the EPA observations. We're then going to look at some lead independent endpoint assessor feedback regarding the level 2 and level 3 observations and what has been seen over the last year. Now, this is slightly distorted compared to normal because of obviously the pandemic, and so we have seen less numbers of live observations. We're then going to have a brief look at what pass and what distinction might look like. So pass v distinction before introducing our remote invigilation offer. And then, of course, like we mentioned previously, we will then offer the opportunity to answer some of your questions. Okay, so we're going to start first of all with an overview of the EPA observation requirements. So this is specifically focusing on the observation element of endpoint assessment for level 2 and level 3. Now, for level 2, you can see that the EPA consists of an apprentice showcase with interview, a PD, and the final assessment being the practical observation there. The level 3 also has a portfolio-based PD, a work-based project with interview, and then the practical observation. And you can see there the difference between the level 2 and the level 3 in what needs to be covered. So the level 2 has 5 bullet points, of which interpersonal communication, equality, presentation is addressed, and then hopefully right first time will also be looked at as well. The level 3 is slightly more complex, as you would imagine. So knowing your customers, customer service culture, business focused service delivery, looking at providing a positive customer experience, the performance, the ownership and responsibility, team working, equality, and presentation. So the practical observation for both the level 2 and 3 EPA does provide the opportunity for substantial synoptic assessment across both standards. The important thing here is that it must include customer interaction. So the observation should really enable the apprentice to evidence their skills and behaviours and attitudes from across the standard to demonstrate those genuine and demanding work objectives. It must be at a time of day when the apprentice will have an opportunity to meet a range of customers, and that's the key theme for today. It's about making sure that we see lots of different types of customers where possible. So across both standards, it's really fundamental that during that practical observation, the apprentice will interact with customers in order to meet the requirements for of the observation criteria as listed in the assessment plan. So we do need to see all of the KSBs evidenced there under the observation element. Now, we do still get lots and lots of requests, especially under special considerations, to use the witness testimony that was introduced during the pandemic by IFET, the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. So, unfortunately, as we were told early summer back in July, that IFET did withdraw the use of the witness testimony, and so this is no longer an option at all for apprentices, even under exceptional circumstances. As much as we would like to offer it, we must stress that this is no longer an option. Now, what we're going to do is focus on customer service specialists to start with, so our level 3 endpoint assessment. And you can see the theme here already highlighted in yellow. So the practical observation must be carried out on a one-to-one basis, reflecting typical working conditions. Now, the first thing to note there is that if they typically work at home, the best bet here would be for the endpoint assessment to be carried out remotely at home by making an apprentice move away from their normal working conditions. It is likely to not provide the same experience and essentially not give potential there to fulfill their criteria, the full criteria that the learner can achieve. So it's important that the normal working conditions are available for a particular learner. Now, you will see lots of reference to the customer types issue today, and allow the apprentice to demonstrate interaction with at least 3 customer types. Now, it's important to note that actually this criteria here is actually just for a pass. So as a minimum, we must see 3 different customer types, and this is proving very difficult for apprentices during their EPA. So to try and get the best from that endpoint assessment, we need to make sure that a learner has booked in their endpoint assessment for a day and time where the apprentice will have opportunities to handle the most or a best range of customers and issues. So it might be here that the apprentice themselves with the line managers and the training provider pre-plan the time of day, perhaps look at whether or not the busiest days, say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, etc. Keep a tally of where a learner is receiving the most number of calls or has the most number of customers coming in, etc. and try and book it for that particular time. If the apprentice worked in the hair and beauty industry, for instance, 9 o'clock on a Monday morning would not be appropriate. As we're aware, hair and beauty often shut down on a Monday. We need to make sure we are giving the apprentice the best possible opportunity. The apprentice also needs to be in the right environment with enough space and resources for them to do their job. So access to all the normal resources is key. and of course take a synoptic approach to assessment of overall competence. So we do recognise that actually adhering to and meeting those 3 different customer types is very difficult in some situations. We also recognise that, just because an endpoint assessment is taking place, it's not necessarily the case that within that hour you will see 3 different customer types. Those areas of the standard which are not able to be evidenced during that hour may be assessed subsequently as part of the Q&A session, which would be carried out directly after the practical observation by the EPA. But the key with that is to remember that the observation only lasts 1 hour, so we cannot offer extra time above a 10% tolerance there to fulfill a Q&A to fill in the blanks. So we must remain impartial. We must make sure that we are consistent with our apprentices, and so therefore it really is key that after that hour and that 10% tolerance level there, that the endpoint assessment will stop. So we cannot rely on the Q&A at the very end. It is the case, obviously, that to seek further clarification, that the LIEPA will ask those questions to try and cover any missing evidence to do with 3 customer types, etc., and any other key evidence that's missing to do with the observation. But we've got to remember that time is of the essence. So what we're going to do now is focus on that 3 different customer types. I've picked out here OB2 as an example. So the assessment requirement is understand different customer types and the roles of emotions in bringing about a successful outcome. So for the past descriptors and past descriptors only, you can see that an ability to assess at least 3 different customer types and their roles of emotions, and the ability to react appropriately to customer emotions for different customer types. So the first thing we need to look at there is what is a customer type. And we've defined 3 customer types as customers who all have varying needs to help broaden the scope of customers that could be captured within this definition. So first thing to note is customer types is plural. So we need to see different customer types. So the first focus is on the word different. What is a customer? A customer could be internal customers. It could be external customers. It could be, for example, customers with hearing difficulties. It could be customers who have English as a second language, etc. What could the queries be about? It could be a customer who is having a sales query, asking for a sales query. It could be a stock or service query. The customer could be ringing or coming into the place of work to complain. They could be returning a product, etc. So you can see there that there is some variety of what different customer types could be, and you would perhaps need to run through with the line manager where this would fit into each individual apprentice to see how you could extract really the varying customer types on the day of the observation. So we have mentioned obviously the customer interaction. And the importance of, if the learner has the opportunity to get this bit right, it really does improve their chances of success. So it's about planning for the day of the observation. We know that it must include customer interaction. We know that it must undertake a range of day-to-day activities in the apprentice's workplace, remembering that that workplace can be at home. And obviously it needs to see 3 different customer types. So we go back there to the customers with varying needs. Is it a sale? Is it a query? Is it a complaint? Is it an internal customer? Is it an external customer, etc.? And of course, reiterating there the time and the day that the observation takes place. And of course, the fact that if we don't see the 3 different customer types, we may be able to seek further clarification depending on the time limit. So stressing again that that 1 hour time limit at level 3 is really key there. So for the customer service standards, it generally will last 1 hour. So there's a maximum of an hour at level 3 with a 10% tolerance, which should include the question and answers as well. Now, the customer service practitioner would be an hour to a maximum hour and a half. It's a must that obviously the observation will be pre-planned, scheduled to the right time of place of work, etc. But what we are seeing as well is learners not turning up to endpoint assessment with photographic ID. So it's really key that the apprentice shows photographic ID on the day of their assessment to the independent endpoint assessor. So what we're going to do now is look at some lead independent endpoint assessors feedback, just to gauge what's good and what's bad, or what could be improved upon for the level 3 standard only. So we can see here that the positives, I mean, bearing in mind that this was during COVID, practical observations have taken place, apprentices are well presented. Of course, presentation is looked at. They are professional, display the correct attributes and quality expected of a level 3. However, the apprentice's job role and responsibilities are often not sufficient to enable them to deal with a variety of customer interaction. So the key here really is to look at the job role. Obviously, it might be a little bit too late now, but with new recruits, with new jobs that are coming available for an apprentice, to look at the job role in detail to make sure that not just the on-programme maps across to the job role to generate that evidence according to the KSBs, but actually looking at the day of the observation, the day of the endpoint assessment as well, making sure that the line manager of the employer, of the learner, is aware of what's required on the day of the endpoint assessment, which is a difficult situation to look at because they're essentially thinking 18 months in advance, 15 months in advance, etc. But it does need to be looked at prior to the apprentice starting. Now, what we do see is practical observations not being arranged for a time of day that would give off the best opportunity for the learner. We mentioned this previously. Monday morning, 9 AM in hair and beauty, for instance, health and beauty is not the ideal time. So making sure that we give the learner the best opportunity to succeed by making sure we book it for an appropriate time and place. Now, the other thing that the lead IEPAs have seen as well this year is that the job roles need to include the scope and breadth to enable them to gather the required evidence and demonstrate the relevant KSBs. So the scope and breadth is the key here. Repetition doesn't allow for that stretch and challenge of a learner. We need to be seeing high-level challenges at level 3. We need to see the scope and breadth of job roles in order for that learner to aim towards those distinction criteria. So as far as the endpoint assessment observations concerned, what can and what can't be done? We have had the question in the past, will any pre-recorded evidence be able to support the assessment criteria? And unfortunately, as much as we would like to, this is a strong no. As per the assessment plan, everything should be live. We can only assess evidence that is observed. Can written evidence be considered for observation assessment? So this is basically looking at the equivalent of, say, a professional discussion or a witness testimony. And again, we cannot deviate away from the assessment plan. So everything, all the evidence must be seen during the observation. And then finally, as we mentioned previously, the witness testimony, can it still be used in exceptional circumstances? And again, like we've pointed out before, unfortunately not, as we know, this has been withdrawn by IFIT in the summer. So what can we do then? So ensure the apprentice is in the correct job role prior to them starting the standard. Now, I appreciate that this is very difficult to manipulate now if an apprentice has already started. We are aware that obviously job roles have changed due to COVID, due to the pandemic. Some learners may have started in the office in a customer-facing role and have now been moved to home working. Unfortunately, there is no scope here to adapt to this regarding EPA unless a remote observation is used. We cannot send in independent endpoint assessors to personal homes for obvious reasons. And so really, the only option here would be to carry out remote observation. Now, the actual job role may have changed as well. It might be that actually a learner was far more proactive within the office, within the customer-facing environment, and has since moved across to working from home as more of a routine rather than anything else. So this is where the key to planning the observation fits in. We'll look at that in a minute. So prior to the job role starting, what we'd recommend is that actually it's not just about a skill scan on the apprentice, but actually a skill scan's carried out on the job role itself to make sure that the apprentice can meet the endpoint assessment requirements. So we'd recommend that before the apprenticeship role starts, discuss this with the line manager, explain the requirement of the observation, explain the 3 different customer types, because if this can't be met at the very end of the on program during endpoint assessment, then we are setting the learner up to fail a little bit here, which is not fair on the learner. So the pre-planning of the observation is key. So what we'd recommend is obviously take note of the busiest times of day, then carry out mock observations at the busiest times of day to make sure that the apprentice gets used to the format of what's happening during the observation. If it is going to be a remote observation, we'd strongly recommend that mock observations are carried out remotely to make sure that the assessor can see, hear, etc., all the relevant evidence that we need to look at in order to give the apprentice the best possible opportunity. And of course, not to forget that we can use internal customers. So if you are struggling with the 3 different customer types, we can use internal customers, external customers, customers with different needs. So we can try and pre-plan that. It's about making sure that on the day, the independent endpoint assessor sees as much variety and range of that job role as possible. So plan that observation where possible. Can the apprentice save any tasks which require customer interaction for the day of the observation in case they don't see those 3 different customer types live, whether that's via phone call, whether that's via customers coming into the office environment, the customer facing environment, etc. So pre-plan that observation of an hour. If it's the quiet period, what is the learner going to do? What is the apprentice going to do to fill that time? So as many different tasks as possible would really help that learner succeed during that observation. So we're now going to look at pass the distinction. And here what I've done is pull out a level 2 example of the customer service practitioner level 2. And in particular, it's important to note that this is communication and it's face-to-face. So obviously, there is a section as well on non-face-to-face. It's important here to note the wording. So compare the wording in the descriptors table. So where the wording might be plural, for instance, it needs to evidence more than one customer. So clear knowledge then here of the Equality Act is really important, as it's also assessed in interpersonal skills. So there's a clear, if we look at the distinction role on the right hand side, it's saying adapting to communication, the tone, behaviour and language to different customers. So we know here that we need to see at least 2 different customers and their interactions, and we need to see clear knowledge of the Equality Act. Okay, so it's not necessarily the case that actually a naturally occurring environment is going to happen just because it's endpoint assessment for the learner to bring in the Equality Act. But this is where the pre-planning kicks in. Can the learner think of a time to bring forward that evidence that links to the Equality Act during the interview for the level 2 practitioner? We need to make sure that you've checked the handbook for plural words, like we mentioned previously, customers, in order to achieve. We do recognise, that some aspects of that standard don't happen. Again, like we mentioned previously. So if in the level 2 instance that it doesn't happen during the observation, We can use the PD up to an extent to mop up what hasn't been seen during the observation, but we cannot rely on that solely, which is why we go back to the importance of pre-planning the observation where possible. We've got to also remember as well that the PD only lasts an hour. It's got KSBs, it's got its own KSBs to look at. So time is of the essence there. We can't rely on that hour just to mop up from that observation. So just to bear in mind that obviously if we do require a resit, whether it's level 2 or level 3 for the observation, we've got to remember that the practical observation is a synoptic assessment. So therefore, during a resit, unfortunately, the apprentice will need to be able to demonstrate the criteria they've previously passed, not just the criteria they've failed during the original assessment. So it's very different to the approach used in the portfolio method of assessment. This is probably easiest to compare to the driving test approach. So if you fail your driving test, you've got to resit. If you fail the driving test on, say, reverse parking, rather than just being assessed on the reverse parking element, you've got to resit the whole assessment, the whole driving test itself. And this is the same with the observation. So if the learner fails the observation, rather than just being assessed on the failed KSBs within the observation, they will need to resit the whole observation itself. And of course, just to remember then that an apprentice cannot resit to upskill their grade. So what I'm going to do now is pass over to my colleague Rebecca Hollenbeek, who is now going to look at the remote observation element of customer service.
Lovely, and good morning, everybody. So we're pleased now to be able to offer the learner either face-to-face or remote assessment as part of their observations. Predominantly at the moment for level 2, we are working on a trial of level 3, but I'll take you through some of the considerations around that as we work through the next few slides. So going back to something Dom said with regards making sure that the observation is fit for that learner's job role, it is a very similar situation when considering is remote observation the right thing to do for that learner as they complete their endpoint assessment. It's about having that conversation with the employer, with the learner, and yourselves as a centre to make sure that that is the best fit. And if that learner is working from home currently, that's what they've done since the pandemic. They have a working laptop with a camera that's forward facing, that the LIEPA can see them. Then to keep them at home, comfortable in their environment, is absolutely the right thing to do and the right area and resource to do to sit that remote assessment, and we'll be happy to support with that. If that learner is travelling a lot, if they are in a busy space, if they're working in an NHS hospital, if they are working in a childcare environment, if there is other people who could be captured on that remote observation that would need us to get permission of them to be able to monitor them, in those situations, in busy restaurants, for example, that is not the best arena for a recorded remote observation. So do bear that in mind. If you are looking to offer your learner the opportunity to do a remote observation, we will ask you to complete a remote observation provider checklist and upload it to us at Gateway. And I have a copy of this that I'll show you over the next couple of slides. You will, in this observation checklist, explain to us the venue of the observation, how it will be delivered, the technology the learner has or the employer has to make that suitable, and if we are able to record the observation as well. We will then work through the observation checklist and we'll reach out to you to say, absolutely, we're more than happy to do a remote observation for this learner, or talk you through the reasons why we feel actually an in-person observation is best suited to that learner. But it's all about making sure that their apprentices are in the normal work environment and what is best suited for their observation. So hopefully you can see now the remote observation checklist. This is what you will work with your employer and your learner to fill in at that gateway meeting, and it's uploaded to us into EPA Pro alongside the gateway declaration form. We're asking you to take us through the technology the learner has in place. So, for example, the learner will need their photo ID. They will need a computer with the webcam so that the LIEPA can watch the learner having those interactions and see the screen if they're working on emails. We also need to be able to hear the customers that the apprentice is dealing with. So if they're working on the phone system, that phone system can be shared outside of the computer through their speakers. That has to be considered as well. They will also need a quiet room. Obviously, the LIEPA does not want to be hearing any other noises in the room. They just want to be focusing on that learner undertaking their assessment. We're also giving you guidance on how to complete this form. So the form has to be worked through thoroughly. It is a 3-page form. There are certain mandated forms, there are certain aspects of that form that are mandated for it to be a successful application to work remotely. And as you can see on screen there, from an LIEPA point of view, the LIEPA will need to hear the phone calls, but they will not need to see the face-to-face interactions. They'll need to see the screen if they're working on emails, and they'll need to be able to hear the voice of the customer coming through the computer. So we are now looking to go live. We have run a pilot with this over the last couple of weeks with a couple of our centres, and it has gone down really, really well. The LIEPAs have found it a really easy and seamless approach to undertaking these assessments. So from last Monday, on the 24th of August, any learners that are working on Level 2 Customer Service Practitioner can have the option of doing their observation remotely. Alongside this, they will do their PD remotely as well. We will not record their remote observation. We will only record the PD. For the remote observation, the learner is just being watched by the independent endpoint assessor. If we have any centres who are working with customer service specialists level 3, again, what has been alluded to earlier in this session, there is a lot more customer interaction we need to see. And a lot of these learners, we are struggling on the pilot that we did to be able to have it work as successfully as we want it to do to enable us to have a full rollout. Therefore, if you want to have a discussion with us about have you got a level 3 learner where you think it's a good fit for them to be able to capture their observation remotely, then we're more than happy to do so. But it's not a full rollout yet. We will let you know as soon as it will be. So, things to consider. Again, these are all about having these conversations with the employer and the learner at the start of that gateway process. Will consent be needed from third-party customers who will take part in the observation? Yes, it must. So any customers that are likely to come in, any internal customers that are likely to be captured, please do let them know that an assessment is being taken place, and although it will not be recorded, they will be captured on camera for that period of time. What technology will be required by the customer? We are working this currently on GoToMeeting software, so if you are working with remote assessment with us currently, it is the same platform that we're working on. It will just need to be that the learner is used to sharing their screen with the LIEPA. Does the LIEPA need to hear and see the apprentice? Absolutely, they will need to see the apprentice screen, hear the apprentice talk to the customers, and in response, hear the customer's feedback and conversations with the apprentice. Does the LIEPA need to hear the customers and the interactions with them? Yes, it does. And if homeworking is homeworking their normal way of working? That's the biggest consideration here. If you have a lot of learners who are working from home as an output of the pandemic, where they are set up with our technology to take incoming Teams calls, incoming Zoom calls, they're booking external meetings through those kind of softwares, then they are a key example of where remote observation will actually work best for them. You don't want to bring them into an office where they might not know the technology, they might not have the right level of Wi-Fi, it might be a noisier place to be. please do keep them at home, and we will be able to observe their observation remotely alongside their normal working practices. So as I mentioned, we have done a pilot of this over the last 8 weeks, and it's been really interesting to see the outputs. The reason we keep reiterating the fact that it's about the role that the learner is done is because we've had instances where actually we've had centres bring learners into the workplace to do an observation, and then when we've got them on the day with the IEPA has fed and spoken to the learner, and the learner's actually more nervous about being in their normal workplace. For them, normal is home, with their comforts, with their setup, with all the IT that they need. They feel better working from home. And we've actually added additional nerves and stress by bringing them in to the office to do their assessment. So please do consider that learner's normal way of working. And if it is home, then a home assessment is absolutely fine for City and Guilds. It is job role specific though, so in some circumstances for the learners to capture those the various different types of customer interactions, they still will need to be seen in their normal workplace. So what we will ask with your learners, if you're going to opt to go down this remote testing route, is that we'd like to do a planning meeting or a pre-meeting with them initially, just to make sure that we've got the right technology in place. We will want to see that the learner, that the IEPA can see the learner's screen prior to the observation taking place. So it would just be the case of arranging a simple planning meeting. We need to make sure that the customer and the apprentice can be heard, and any internal or external customers can be heard. If the learner is walking around, so if we are doing a remote observation, for example, at a service desk or in a car dealership, if a learner is moving into the back office to speak to a colleague or a team leader or a manager, who is moving that device? Is it via an additional iPad that needs setting up that follows the learner? Has the learner got a laptop that can be moved if they're not working on a desktop? So do consider the technology options available to that learner to ensure it's a seamless assessment. And also please do consider that it will be a quiet room required if we are doing it at their employer's workplace. So it will be an assessment required room. That room can then be used to do the portfolio Q&A session and also the PD session. And as we mentioned earlier, the portfolio and the Q&A alongside the PD discussion as part of customer service specialist and practitioner are recorded, but the observation will not be. And as I mentioned, that's just due to the GDPR concerns and requirements that we have to fall in line with. Thank you very much. That is the end of the webinar.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, what we're going to do now is spend some time to focus on some of the questions that you have hopefully entered into the questions tab. If you bear with us a little bit, we will try and pull these questions out. Just struggling with technology at the minute, do bear with us, please. Okay, we have a few questions in. We'll try and pick out as many as we can. So
I can take one, Dom. With regards to the question about if your learner has already gone through a gateway, can we still offer the remote observation? Yes, we can. If you can reach out to me after this webinar, all we need to do is reach out to the EPA booking team and amend that to a remote option rather than a face-to-face. So my details will come up at the end of the slides. If you want to give me a quick call or a quick email post-webinar, we can amend the observation to a remote assessment. That isn't a problem. We'll just need you to get the form in, and again, we'll send a copy of the form out alongside this webinar and the recording, and the form is also now being uploaded into EPA Pro, so you can access it there as well.
thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so specific question here. I have a learner in a bridal shop. She only sees one customer in 90 minutes. She's doing level 2, but will struggle to interact with different types. Any suggestions? It's about the pre-planning. So perhaps if the learner has pre-planned the observation, she wouldn't start to see the first customer until she's done some other tasks. So if she does have some customer interaction that can be saved for the day, with the observation being an hour at level 2, an hour to an hour and a half at level 2. If the customer had booked in at say 11 o'clock, you'd perhaps want to start the endpoint assessments at say the observation around 10:30, and use those pre-planned tasks where she communicates somehow with customers. So that might be external calls, it might be replying to previous calls that have come in, etc. So we'd strongly recommend that it's pre-planned.
There's also a question with regards to start times, and a learner who starts her shift at 7 o'clock and that's the busiest time between 7 and 8:30. Can the LIEPA arrive prior to that start time? Absolutely. The LIEPA wants to see that learner having the best success and ability to achieve their observation outcomes. If it means an early start time or that the LIEPA has to get there pre-7 for the event, that isn't a problem.
Thanks, Rebecca. So during face-to-face observations, do both sides of the phone calls also need to be heard? And the answer is we want to give the learner the best possible opportunity to achieve. So yes, we really do need to hear both sides of the phone calls. Otherwise, an LIEPA will not know the full story, the full activity of what's going on. So we need to see obviously the responses by the learners. So ideally we do need to hear the full conversation from the phone calls. Otherwise, it's very much a guessing game by the LIEPA. Okay. Another question here. How can we access the apprentice training manual on the first slide? So this is a purchasable resource which can be purchased via
Smart Screen or via reaching out to one of your account managers. Again, if you want to contact me post this webinar, I can send you the details of it. It's a really, really useful source of material, the apprenticeship training manual. There's a host of tasks that a learner can work through that covers off all the KSBs of the standard and will generate you a lot of evidence from that learners on programme delivery.
So the idea behind the apprenticeship training manual is that it will give the learner underpinning knowledge. It will allow the learner to contextualize that underpinning knowledge, and then it will form a fantastic stepping stone then for the learner then to go ahead with their job role, and perhaps then off the back of that generate further better evidence when they are in their workplace. So it's not a tool that you would rely on regarding building a portfolio, but it's a fantastic starting point to build on. You can insert evidence from that apprenticeship training manual into the portfolio if you wish, But it's highly likely actually that it would act as a fantastic starting point, and actually during the on programme, as the learner works through that 12-month on programme, they would generate further evidence on top of that ATM to then put forward to the portfolio. How many customers do the level 2s need to be seen to be interacting with? Are we getting any information about the level 2 face-to-face observations, as today appeared to be more about level 3? So the how many customers do the level 2s need to be interacting with? Well, as many as possible, really, because obviously that gives the learner the best opportunity to see a range of activities, to see how the learner reacts with a range of customers. So it's not necessarily about quantity, but it's about the quality that's then developed from those observations. So we wouldn't rely on one. Obviously, if the descriptors table mentions plural customers, we need to see, for distinction, for instance, we need to see at least 2. So that's something to bear in mind when you are planning your observations. So there is a question here about, will the LIEPA consider email communication with a customer as a customer type? Now, although it is communication with customers, it's not interactive. So the problem with email communication is that the learner, the apprentice, does not receive an immediate response. So it's not the best use of evidence. It is responding as far as non-face-to-face is concerned, but the problem with it, you can't gauge responses, you can't gauge reactions, etc., and adapt to those reactions. So although it is a form of communication, it's certainly not the best type.
There's also a query about an LIEPA working on a Saturday. Absolutely, in certain situations, if that is the best time for that learner to be observed, then Saturday observations are considered. We do have to point out, however, we have no internal centre support teams open on a Saturday. So if there's any changes and any problems, it's just making us aware of that. So Saturday assessments are absolutely available, but it's just managing that with you and making sure that we've got the right contacts in place should a Saturday assessment be delivered.
There's a comment around training manuals are good, but the enhanced resources are better. There should be some more mock knowledge tests created, though. Not sure about the knowledge tests there for the endpoint assessment for customer service, but there's a valid point. We do offer apprenticeship training manuals for learners, which are learner facing. We also offer smart screen resources as well. These come in 2 forms. So we have the smart screen resource around the 3473 diploma, which maps across to the endpoint assessment. And we also offer enhanced smart screen as well, which is a lot more interactive with videos, etc., to support the delivery staff, really, with schemes of work, presentations, PowerPoints, worksheets, etc. So helps lay out your on-program offer from a delivery perspective. So Gordon does say, sorry, getting confused with the BA level 3 regarding the knowledge test. Not a problem. Just looking through a few more now.
Yeah, there's a question about the witness testimony and the dispensation. It's not related to the learner's start date, unfortunately. Even if they did start in COVID when that dispensation was still available, any learners who are coming through Gateway now and have done since the 1st of August, unfortunately, will go back to the normal method of assessment within the standards. So for customer service practitioner and for specialists, the observation will be an observation. there isn't unfortunately an option to use the witness testimony to underpin the observation. It will be an IEPA observation, either in their learner's workplace or at their home address.
So we do have another question here. My organisation has taken on an apprentice who is part of the Inclusive project. He has communication issues as he has autism. What exemptions would there be? His department have taken him on and not considered the EPA process, and we do not have a choice. So this is very much down to applying for special considerations, which I believe can be done in EPA Pro.
Yeah, they'll apply for them through War Garden, and what we will do, we will work with the EQA body to see what support we can provide that learner, where at the heart of everything, we need to make sure we're giving the learner the best opportunity to succeed in their endpoint assessment. So it will be an understanding of what that learner could achieve and how we can best support them.
We would look at each case on an individual scenario there, so please do get in touch when your learner, as soon as you want, or when your learner comes towards Gateway.
There's also a question on the GoToMeeting platform. That software is compatible with a Mac and a PC and a laptop. It can also work on phones and iPads. So again, if you've got a learner with a role that does require some movement, and actually working on a smaller device would be better captured, that's absolutely fine.
So there's a question here about resits. How many resits can a learner do for an observation? Now, there's no maximum amount of number of resits a learner can take. However, you've got to bear in mind that there's a cost implication for a resit, but also making sure that the learner is prepared for that resit. We don't want to be you don't want to be putting a learner forward if they're not ready, which means they may need further learning to take place, further preparation, etc. So there's no maximum amount for the number of resits. And the follow-on question from that is, will a resit on an observation affect an overall grade? Well, at level 2, the capping has been removed, which actually means that if a learner potentially achieves, say, a distinction in the portfolio-based interview and a distinction in the PD, and then resits and receives a distinction overall for the observation, then the likelihood is there, or the definite answer there is that the learner would still achieve a distinction overall, as the capping has been removed at level 2, but that's not the case across all EPA standards. So another question here from Claire: if a learner is remote working and dealing with phone calls, how will the IEPA hear the customer? My learner often uses headsets only. So that's a normal practice for learners often to use headsets, Claire. What we would need to do is perhaps make sure that we've had a planning call with you first and the learner to see the setup, because the IEPA would need to hear the other side of the call. It might be that during the observation we need to adapt to the situation. The learner may well need to put the phone onto speaker so that the IEPA can hear it. Obviously, the learner would also need to tell the person he or she was speaking to that there is an assessment taking place before the conversation starts. But we would need, probably best bet there is to do a planning meeting first to discuss how the learner would operate with technology. But in this particular instance, yes, the IEPA would need to hear both sides of the call. So another question: what can be done for field-based engineers who work in customer homes? They don't work on the phones to deal with queries. So actually our IEPAs can't go into customer homes, unfortunately. It's perhaps something that you would want to get in touch with us so that we can discuss. We may need to look at different parts of their job role, because unfortunately we cannot send IEPAs into personal homes at this stage. So there's another question here saying, can a learner expect the IEPA to interact with them during the observation? That's not normal practice. The IEPA is there to observe only, so will not prompt the learner to show them evidence necessarily. They are there on an observation basis only. So apologies, we do seem to have had some sound issues at the very beginning, so apologies about that. I think we've covered there probably 95% of the questions. We are struggling a little bit to see them, to draw them down, but what we will do, as time is nearly up, is to take the remaining questions and put together a frequently asked, easy for me to say, frequently asked question sheet and upload them to our website, so that you can to look at them in your own time. There has been a couple more come through. Question relates to witness statement dispensation. It is such a good document that I'm using it for the portfolio as simple witness testimonies evidence. Is this okay? You can use witness testimonies as part of the portfolio. Absolutely, Gordon. That's not a problem. What we can't do is use it as dispensation against the live observation. So you're more than welcome to put in witness testimonies into the portfolio, but you just wouldn't be able to use the witness testimony dispensation anymore instead of the observation itself. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. It does, Gordon, the layout is great and it does encourage the employers to write more. That's quite right. Yeah, which takes the emphasis off you. Yes, absolutely feel free to use the witness testimonies in the portfolio itself. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. Much appreciated. We appreciate that you are very, very busy, and an hour out of your daily routine is a long time. We will endeavour to get the frequently asked questions list uploaded by the end of the week, along with the slide deck, and hopefully you should get an automatic recording sent to you as well from today's webinar. So thank you very much from myself and Rebecca today for joining us. We hope you found it very useful indeed. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.